What's up, everyone? I hope you're having a good day today. The section in Galatians we're covering is Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. A very short section, but a very important section. Just to kind of recap of what we talked about on Monday, I discussed how Paul was going at those who were following the law and saying that they were enslaving themselves to this bondage, or you could follow Jesus and be in this freedom with Jesus. And then I talked about how faith is expressed through love. And that word faith doesn't just mean this intellectual thing, but it's this enacted obedience to Jesus. It's actually an expression. It's actions towards other that we express our faith. And now Paul he's still going to be debating this truth of how we have this freedom in the gospel, but he's going to get at how we can either walk by the Spirit or we can walk by the flesh. We can indulge in sin or we can indulge in the Spirit, the Holy Spirit guiding and directing us each and every day. And so chapter 5 and 6 are very critical for us to understand, but they're very critical because sometimes you may ask the question like, I want to grow, but I don't know how to. Like, how do I grow in Jesus? How do I become more like Jesus? Well, chapters 5 and 6, I think, can help us answer that question. So let's go ahead and begin by reading Galatians chapter 5, verse 13. It says this: "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh, to indulge in sin. Rather, serve one another humbly in love." This actually reminds me of something Paul says in Romans. In Romans chapter 6, verse 1, he says, "What shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? By no means." Okay, so in Romans 6, he's talking about, no, we don't want to keep on sinning. That's foolishness. We don't do that. And right here, I think this is what he's getting at. He's saying, don't use the freedom, the grace that you have from Jesus to indulge in sin. Some of us may think that when we start following Christ, that, he shows us grace, so we'll be okay. We can just keep on sinning, living in continuous sin. And Paul right here is saying, no, don't abuse the freedom that you have in Jesus. Rather, use the freedom that you have to serve one another humbly in love. And so right here, he's getting at this denial of self, that no, we don't serve ourselves when we become Christians. We serve others humbly in love. And that Greek word love is agape. It means is this love that Jesus has for God, that he went and sacrificed himself for God. He did everything he could for the Father. And so the Father does for the Son, and the Holy Spirit does for the Father and the Son. That Trinity, how they love each other so well in community. They sacrifice, they give, they talk, they love each other well in unity. And this is that kind of love. We sacrifice for one another. We rebuke one another. We encourage one another. We are there for one another out of love for each other. And so he's saying, don't indulge in the freedom that you have in Jesus. Instead, serve one another humbly in love. Let me read to you verse 14. "For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself." That Greek word love, agape, is there again. Love your neighbor as yourself. One thing I always reflect on when I read over that command, that law, love your neighbor as yourself, is sometimes I'm very critical of people, of what they do or how they act sometimes. And sometimes I have to take a step back and say, well, I haven't walked a mile in their shoes. I don't know exactly what they're going through. So in that moment, I need to learn how to love them as I would love myself. And sometimes when I lash out, I don't need to be rebuked. I need to have a loving arm around me and say, hey, yeah, you did mess up, but I'll walk with you through that. And I think that's somewhat how you can fulfill this command. That as you love your neighbor as yourself, it's a loving arm around someone and saying, I'll walk with you. Yes, you messed up, but I'm here for you. And sometimes it is a rebuke. Sometimes it is maybe an encouragement. But Paul right here is harping back to loving each other, humbly serving one another in love. And then he says in verse 15, "If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other." I think he's harping back on of this truth of if you keep trying to obey the law fully, if you think that only if you can fully obey the law and then you come into this covenant with God, no, like that's not okay. And so I think he's getting at maybe some people in the church were like kind of biting at each other, like, hey, you're not very good at following this law, or you are horrible at this. And so he's saying if you keep on doing that, you will eventually destroy each other. So instead, love each other, serve each other. And so as I was reading through this text today, this is the reflection question I had. What does love look like today? Again, what does love look like today? I think love looks like exactly what Paul says in verse 13. Serving one another humbly in love. You want to know how to grow in Jesus? Stop thinking so much about yourself and go serve somebody. Go love somebody. Don't think so much about yourself. I think Paul is trying to get at this truth that when we become followers of Jesus, it's this denial of self and this radical service to other people and to Jesus as King. And so not only do I think that's the answer, but it's respecting people's boundaries, especially during this time where we are in COVID-19 and people may be a little bit stressed out when you get a little bit too close to them, right? Maybe it's respecting that boundary. I will serve you in love at this moment. I know that you're uncomfortable, so I'll stay my 6 feet distance. I'll have my mask on, and I will serve you in that way. Another way was just today. I felt like someone showed love to me today, and it was a friend of mine who just called me and asked how I was doing, how Whitney was doing, and how we were doing in our new home, and how my personal life was, and how the church was doing and everything. And in that moment, I felt like he was taking time out of his day, a man who I adore and respect, but he took the time to call me and ask me how I was doing. And I felt like in that moment he was loving me because he was sacrificing his own time, spending time with his wife and his newborn child to speak to me and ask about me and Whitney. And so I felt loved in that moment. So maybe for you, it's calling someone and asking them how they're doing, your friend or your family member, just calling them and checking up on them. But again, that reflection question, what does love look like today? I think it's exactly what Paul says in verse 13. Serve one another humbly in love. So you want to know how to grow in Jesus? Serve someone other than yourself and do it humbly in love, not expecting anything back, but just loving them in love, humbly in love. I hope you have a great Wednesday, and I will talk to you on Friday.